Hello, Gerry.
How you doing, Michele?
Really great. I'm Michele Tittler from Race-Based Law here in Vancouver, British Columbia. And this is my political partner and husband, Gerry Gagnon from Victoria, British Columbia. Gerry today is going to read the petition and then explain it, so stay tuned. Take it over, Gerry.
Okay, so we'll start off by reading this petition that we've drafted to the Government of Canada, and then I'll explain the clauses in it and why we have drafted this petition. Petition to the House of Commons. We, the undersigned citizens of Canada, draw the attention of the Government of Canada to the following. That whereas the Indian Act and Section 91, subsection 24 of the Constitution Act 1867 have divided Canadians by race and heritage, have perpetuated the unequal treatment of Canadian Indians, providing the legal framework for segregation via the reserve system, have prevented reserve Indians from equal provincial educational access, have prevented reserve Indians from having the full legal, economic, and property rights and opportunities of other Canadian citizens. And whereas the inclusion of sections 35 and 25 in the Constitution Act 1982 have divided Canadians by race and heritage, have disrupted legal, commercial, and exploration activities, have introduced legal uncertainty into property ownership, have left some Canadians without proper police protection, as in Caledonia, Ontario, and have left most Canadians with diminished rights, with every expansion of Indigenous rights based on Section 35. And whereas the inclusion of, quote, with particular attention to the circumstances of Aboriginal offenders, unquote, in Section 718.2E of the Criminal Code, has resulted in a two-tiered system of justice wherein Canadians receive different legal outcomes depending on their race, ethnic heritage. And whereas the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples contains provisions that are fundamentally incompatible with Canada's constitutional framework. Therefore, your petitioners call upon the Government of Canada to take the following actions. The passage of the repeal of the Indian Act. The passage of the removal of, with particular attention to the circumstances of Aboriginal offenders in Section 718.2E of the Criminal Code. The removal of Canada's signature from the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The calling of a constitutional conference pursuant to Section 35.1 of the Constitution Amendment Proclamation 1983, leading to the repeal of Sections 35 and 25 of the Constitution Act 1982 and Section 91, subsection 24 of the Constitution Act 1867. The active encouragement of the provincial legislatures to do the same, or via provincial referenda, and the calling of a federal provincial constitutional conference to finalize these changes desired by the people of Canada, including setting a date for the final termination of treaty and land claims submissions. Unquote. That's the text of our petition to the Government of Canada.
End race-based law. That's why we're called End Race-Based Law. We want to end all race laws. I mean, it's a simple enough thing to ask for, but the kind of egregious subject this has become for all the people that benefit from race laws. There's an entire industry that's been created. Lots of people are getting a lot of money, making a lot of money. Lawyers are making money hand over fist, no matter who they represent, and no one's really representing Canadians. And so Gerry, why don't you take it over now and explain the petition to people? Explain this stuff to us.
Yes, I'm sure it sounds like a little too much legalese for most people on the surface, but it's not. It's actually not very complicated. There are really three sections here that we're dealing with. There are the discriminatory clauses in our Constitution, that are the foundation of the discriminatory laws and treatment that results. There is the criminal code, where it is designated that Aboriginal offenders be sentenced in a different light from the rest of Canadians. And there is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People.
As if we're not all indigenous to this earth. Like it's such a strange, whatever it is, concept. We're all indigenous.
Well, anyway, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is being used by the Supreme Court to justify, for instance, the consult and accommodate clause that's been imposed on.
They have a lot of alternative reasons why they are using the natives for this. And I don't know if we should go into that right now. Maybe another podcast we can go into that, their Agenda 21. But they are using the natives and the indigenous people around the world for their own agendas. So it's really quite sleazy.
These one at a time. We'll get to the UN one in a minute.
Yeah.
The constitutional clauses are the most important.
Yes.
Section 91, subsection 24 from the BNA Act in 1867 is the original clause that gave the federal government the authority over, quote, Indians and Indian lands. It's that clause that constitutes the foundation of the situation we have today. The reason Canadian Aboriginals or Canadian Indians, as you will, they're still called Indians in the Constitution. That's why I still use the term. The foundation for the fact that Canadian Indians do not participate in provincial school systems or do not participate in provincial health plans is Section 9124 of the BNA Act. Indians from the very beginning in this country were classified as a separate entity from the rest of Canadians in our Constitution. In 1982, with the Trudeau Constitution, this not only was not removed, it was added to by sections 25 and 35 of the 1982 Constitution, which further entrenched the separation of Aboriginal Canadians from the rest of Canadians in the legal and constitutional framework.
May I jump in here now, Gerry? This is where a lot of natives have it really wrong, and they're spreading this misinformation, which ultimately is a lie, that Canada doesn't honor their treaties. And what they're referring to is this Section 35 of the Constitution, which is rather ambiguous. It just says that they get inherent rights. They've used that clause, lawyers and this entire industry that's developed. This is where the industry really grew, and where in the last 30 years, Aboriginals have now been saying that all industry has to consult with them. All of that comes from this clause that says that they have inherent rights, and they've been interpreting it, reinterpreting it in court. So judges and lawyers are standing in court every day across Canada while we all go to work and pay for all of this, making decisions that give this one race, which qualifies as racism, special inherent rights that go so far beyond any treaty that it's a lie when they say honor the treaties, and that we as in whoever else is not their race have to consult with them. So Gerry, take it over from there. I wanted to say that because that's the part that Canadians, I know that I didn't understand that until you explained it to me on the phone. That is how we came up with the name End Race-Based Law. Once Gerry explained Section 35 and them using this in court, and this entire, Bay Street lawyers downtown Toronto and Vancouver, all across the country, getting rich off this misery, grievance, blame game at the expense of innocent taxpayers, which also include natives. So take it over, Gerry.
All right. Back to Section 9124 of the 1867 Constitution Act, that gave Parliament authority over Indians and lands reserved for the Indians. That meant Parliament had to figure out how to administer Indians as separate people from the rest of Canadians.
And all along the Aboriginals and the Chiefs are going along with this, correct? They have agreed to all of this all the way along, right?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Well, I mean, Canada implemented the Indian Act, but there was no objection from the chiefs, correct? I mean, and even when Canada tried to get out of the Indian Act, they've been complicit all the way along. They have agreed to all of this all the way along. Is that correct?
Well, the only way Canada can get out of the Indian Act is to amend the Constitution. The Indian Act is an act of Parliament that was written to administer the discriminatory clause in the Constitution, which is Section 91(24).
Thank you.
If the Indian Act was simply repealed without amending the Constitution, a new Indian Act would have to be written. That's why we come to the Constitution as the bottom line. I'm going to read something here from a Canadian lawyer talking about Section 35 and its implications. Quote, Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution, Canada's supreme law states, quote, the existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada are hereby recognized and affirmed. It's Section 35 that gives the Indians their, quote, inherent rights, unquote. The Canadian government did not initially plan to include Aboriginal rights so extensively within the Constitution when the Act was being redrafted in the early 1980s. Early drafts and discussions during the patriation of the Canadian Constitution did not include any recognition of those existing rights and relationships. But through campaigns and demonstrations, Aboriginal groups in Canada successfully fought to have their rights enshrined and protected. As constitutional law professor Anthony Hall has pointed out, 9 of the 10 Canadian provincial premiers demanded in 1981 that Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution be taken out. They didn't get their way. And unfortunately for all of us, they compromised in the end and ended up signing the deal. The problem with Section 35 from the beginning, of course, was that no one knew what it meant. There was no agreement at the conference that approved it as to what it meant. And rather than taking it out, which was the proper, responsible thing to do, they decided that they'd have further meetings and work out the meaning of it down the road after it's already part of the Constitution. One of the most foolish things I've ever encountered in politics. So between 1983 and 1987, there were 4 constitutional conferences with the premiers and the federal government, but they couldn't decide on a definition for the phrase in Section 35. As a result, the federal government decided to leave it up to the courts to decide this issue. And so we have had
the Indian industry. Now the Indian, this is where the,
now where case by case they decide one little part of what Section 35
all money.
means. And they're not done yet. We're still not sure what Section 35 fully means. Because it keeps getting redefined court case.
It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. We're not getting any closer together.
It's open-ended. When you don't define a basic principle of your country, then it's an open-ended thing.
And so now, Gerry, what we have is this particular inherent rights, these race laws that actually conflict with basic human rights and our basic constitutions. They are literally legally in conflict with each other. We could have a court case, potentially, where we fight this right up to the very top. I mean, it's very unconstitutional in the end to have race laws. It goes against basic human rights, and we have to be able to weigh human rights ahead of one race's rights.
And so Section 25 basically reinforces Section 35 and the original 91(24), and it puts into the Constitution any Aboriginal treaty or other rights, and any, quote, rights or freedoms that now exist by way of land claim agreements or may be so acquired. Now, what's resulted here is, for instance, the Nunavut Agreement, the treaty with the Inuit in the Northwest Territories that was signed. Unlike any other document, any other government act, any municipal setting up of the City of Toronto, for instance, the Toronto City Charter can be amended by the provincial government that wrote it without even participation of the City of Toronto, if that's what they chose. But the treaties now have been put into the Constitution, which means every treaty, in order for it to be changed, would A, have to be a the Indian band or Aboriginal group involved, and then B, would require a constitutional amendment. Each of these treaties, in effect, is now part of our Constitution.
When did that, what section is that, Gerry?
That's Section 25.
Oh my God.
That's the section that also says that their rights will not be overruled by things like the Charter. It specifically says the guarantee in this Charter, that's the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, shall not be construed as to abrogate or derogate from any Aboriginal treaty or other rights or freedoms that pertain to the Aboriginal peoples of Canada.
Native supremacy.
In other words, what pertains to them is over and above even the Charter of Rights and
Yep.
Freedoms.
All other races of people, all other human beings, it doesn't matter who they are or who built this country or how hard they've worked. We have literally native supremacy in our Constitution.
And so that is what means the tinkering doesn't work. You can try to change a little bit about this, like the reserves. We can't get rid of reserves with that in the Constitution.
Yeah. And we
can't become a unified nation of individuals.
But Gerry, I want to go back to the treaties. Here's what's interesting. We have read the treaties and we post the treaties often. The treaties are clearly state that the Aboriginals have obligations to not interfere with commerce or anything else. So interestingly enough, although the treaties are in the Constitution, they literally conflict with Section 35 that gives them inherent rights, because it specifically says in the treaties that they not interfere with commerce or travel or the goings on of other Canadians.
Well,
they have obligations, not just, they don't have just rights, they have obligations.
In more detail, okay?
They never seem to, wait, but Gerry, the point being that whenever they refer to the treaties, they're always, always, always referring to Canada, which means us, who are not their race. That's all it means. We have obligations and they have rights. And that's the way it is. We have obligations and they have rights. But that's not at all what the treaties say. The treaties are quite clear that the land was ceded and that they have obligations to follow the law.
Yes, well, it's clear even in the United Nations Declaration, there are no obligations for Indigenous people.
It's free reign. That's why they're such bullies.
Only obligations for government.
They bully industry. They bully politicians. I mean, they've gotten it so now our own Constitution and our own laws have tied us up. And that's a joke they made 30 years ago and why they did this. Their joke was that they were going to stranglehold Canada and white man by his own laws. I mean, how cruel is that? No one did that to them. People were literally just trying to educate them to bring them into the 21st century. No one was trying to, completely, this is the 32 million other people, other races, there's 34 million altogether, 2 million of them, 32 million of other people who work really hard to give them a life to be able to take us to court every day. I mean, it's just gone so far. So, Gerry, what else?
Well, again, the other two components of the petition are Section 718 to subsection E, which is the criminal code provision that Aboriginal offenders in the criminal system should receive special sentencing conditions because of their being Aboriginal. Mm-hmm. It's such a blatantly racist clause that it's offensive.
It sure is.
Constitutional, therefore it exists. And the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Now, I want to talk about this one for a minute. Okay. Some people might wonder why we included it when we're talking about changing Canadian law. Now, the current government refused to sign this declaration when it first went through the United Nations. The three countries that have consistently opposed the United Nations, how shall I refer to it, one world agenda or one government agenda, the desire of the United Nations to be our world government. The United States, Australia, and Canada have consistently been three countries that have been reluctant to go down that road. Of course, to a large degree because of how corrupt and dictatorial so many of the member states of the United Nations are. The idea that they would have a say in running our country is terrifying. But unfortunately, the current Canadian government, 4 years after refusing to sign it, for still somewhat really unspecified reasons
They
why
got
they
bullied.
signed it. And it's the most confusing thing this current federal government has done, to me anyway, since they've been in power. When they refused to sign it, they outlined an excellent case as to why the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is in direct conflict with the Constitution of Canada. Now, when they turned around and signed the declaration, they said, well, it's not legally binding on us, so it's just a statement of principles, and they won't be able to enforce it here in Canada.
That's how we've been sucked into all of this stuff.
Let me finish, please.
Yeah.
Then the Supreme Court came along and used one of the clauses in the declaration to justify the consult and accommodate ruling that it gave, whereby virtually any resource development planned in Canada now has to at least pass by the idea, if not get the outright approval of any Indian bands whose ancestors might formerly have traversed that territory. So the United Nations Declaration has already had a serious impact on this country, and the government hasn't commented on it, hasn't withdrawn their signature, has left it hanging in the air in a very irresponsible way.
Mm-hmm.
And their own language from originally when they refused to sign the document condemns them for this. And they've made themselves look foolish on this file. And I don't know what to say. They have not given any logical reason for totally reversing their stance on this. Now, I want to read...
They got bullied, Gerry.
I want to read some of the sections from this Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, because what in effect it does, it's funny, at the very end of it all, the very last clause, they say, nothing in the Declaration allows people to dismember or impair the territorial integrity of sovereign and independent states. In other words, you supposedly can't use this declaration to take apart a country, but all of the clauses in it empower Indigenous people to break away from the countries they currently belong to. The clauses specifically state they have a legal right to set up their own types of government, to set up their own structures, and that our government is obligated to give them that and then to negotiate with them. Article 3, Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status. So they can choose whether to be part of Canada or not.
No one else gets those rights. I mean, the United Nations doesn't acknowledge any other people, so they're clearly using them for something.
Article 5, Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and strengthen their distinct political, legal, economic, social, and cultural institutions.
Institutionalized.
While retaining their right to participate fully, if they so choose, in the political, economic, social, and cultural life of the state. So they have an opt-out clause.
Yeah.
They have a right to be part of Canada, but they have a right to not be if they so choose.
Yeah. The only people who get those rights. The only people.
And it repeats this in many fashions, clause after clause after clause. It says they have the right to establish and control their own educational systems and institutions, providing education in their own languages.
But with whose money?
Indigenous peoples and individuals have the right to belong to an Indigenous community or nation in accordance with the traditions and customs of the community or nation concerned. That's a right in Article 9.
With whose money does all this happen?
Well, the UN's not going to pay for any of it. And then Article 18, Indigenous peoples have the right to participate in decision-making in matters which would affect their rights, through representatives chosen by themselves in accordance with their own procedures. So in other words, if it's a tribal inheritance thing, they have a right to that. They don't have to have democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And Article 19 is what the Supreme Court used to force consult and accommodate onto Canada. Quote, states shall consult and cooperate in good faith with the Indigenous peoples concerned in order to obtain their free, prior, and informed consent before adopting and implementing legislative or administrative measures that may affect them. Well, since they're citizens of Canada, virtually any legislative measure will affect them as citizens of Canada, the way it affects everyone else.
So, Gerry, the idea that 500 years later of other people inhabiting the same land as them, that they just simply can't accept that other people also live here and that they have to be separate from them because I guess they hate them or whatever it is. I mean, all the other races around the world that come here all seem to be willing to, follow laws and abide by this really great thing that we've got going on where we all do this together. But for some reason, they've got this hate on for anybody who is not their race, and they've got to stay segregated. They've got to stay, and they've got to stay in power, and they've got to bully. They're going to bully everybody.
To be fair, less than half of them are still on the reserve. So
I know that
have walked away from this.
You blame lawyers for this, Gerry, and I actually do blame the Native chiefs for this. They are racist thugs, some of them. Stewart, Phillips, Nepanak, those guys.
Michele, but what we're talking about is the way we've enabled them today. That's
I agree.
Our Constitution. They didn't write the Constitution. We did.
Yep.
They didn't put in the clauses that I'm talking about today. We did. They didn't put in the Aboriginal offenders thing into the criminal code. Parliament did. And we're the ones who signed this idiotic UN declaration.
But they pushed all of our politicians. They bullied and bullied and bullied and bullied, and they still do.
The kind of people we're electing, that they're so sissies that they can be bullied.
I agree. That's why you and I are doing this, because I'm not a sissy.
Then everyone in Parliament is basically a wuss.
I agree.
Well, but they're not. So there's other aspects to this, okay?
Well, that's what brings us to
the... bullied. There are a lot of really wrong-headed, silly people now in leadership positions in our country.
That's true.
They're all throughout our universities.
Yeah.
Now, this business of indigenous peoples is a brand new thing.
Yeah.
You go back 30 years, there
as if white people just drop from the sky and are not indigenous to the earth.
Now, the term has been invented to cover people who are in an earlier stage of social evolution around the planet. And although they have no connection with one another for the most part, because they live a tribal lifestyle from 1,000
They're tribalists.
years ago.
That's what they are. They're tribalists.
That's now been labeled not by them, but
Yeah.
by university people. They have been labeled as indigenous. They've been given a whole title. They've been given a whole purpose. The United Nations has written up this nice declaration for them. And the chiefs are profiting from all of this. They're, of course, happy and encouraging it all. But the movers and shakers of this in Canada up until now have been white, not Indian. That's fact.
And this is the reason why we started the petition, because we realized that what we have to do is start a movement from grassroots movement with Canadian taxpayers who signed this petition, and let Parliament know, let the politicians know that that's not what we want. That's not a Canada. That's not the Canada we came here for. That's not the Canada we built. I mean, our ancestors live here too. They're buried here too. They built this country. The natives didn't. They stayed in their fiefdoms, and they still want to stay in their fiefdoms. They haven't suggested that they want to contribute to other people or to Canada or the growth of Canada. They've only ever suggested that they want total, utter power over everything. That's all they've ever suggested.
Okay, so now back to the petition. The Constitution of Canada, a lot of Canadians aren't even aware of how the Constitution of Canada gets changed, but this is the current setup. The Senate and the House of Commons and 2/3 of the provinces, representing at least 50% of the population of Canada, would all have to pass appropriate resolutions. In addition, constitutional conferences would have to be held involving the Prime Minister, the Premiers of the provinces, and representatives of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. Now, since the passage of the 1982 Constitution, they've attempted to make it even more difficult for Canadians to change their Constitution. They added a law in 1996 when Jacques Chrétien tried to buy Quebec support by promising them that there'd be no constitutional changes ever that affected Quebec.
Oh my God, I didn't know this.
Agreed. And so a law was passed in 1996 that says, in order for the Constitution to be changed, Ontario and Quebec have to agree, 2 of the maritime provinces have to agree, 2 of the 3 prairie provinces have to agree, and British Columbia. Now, as every constitutional commentator pointed out at the time, this is all just making it more difficult to change the Constitution.
It's a lawyer's game. That's all it is.
We have a right to be able to change our Constitution. Now, also, BC and Alberta have both passed legislation where they'd have to hold a referendum in their province. And that's how undemocratic it fundamentally is. The 1867 Constitution that founded Canada was never voted on by the citizens of the country. Not at that point and not at any point since. The 1982 changes to the Constitution, what was called the repatriation of the Constitution from Great Britain, again, was never voted on by the Canadian people. None of the new clauses that were added did the Canadian people ever have a chance to provide their input on. These were imposed on us. And then a Constitution not only was imposed on us, but a Constitution that they keep telling us is almost impossible to change.
Even though they changed it.
Us having constitutional conferences by saying, oh no, we couldn't get anything done anyway, it would be impossible to change the Constitution.
Even though they wrote it.
That is true. If that is true, if this Constitution that was imposed on the people of Canada without them being able to vote on it in this so-called democracy, if that Constitution is unable to be changed, then that Constitution is a fraud. It's a fraud. And one thing that needs to be pointed out here, the only chance the Canadian people have ever had to vote on anything pertaining to their Constitution was in 1992, in the so-called Charlottetown referendum, when additional proposals were made to give Quebec the road to nationhood, to allow the Aboriginal tribes to become nations. When these proposals were presented to the people of Canada, they resoundingly voted them down. Yet within 2 years, the federal government started giving the very things to the Aboriginal organizations that had been voted down by the Canadian people. That's the Chrétien government of the time.
This is just
These
terrible.
specific things like self-government were voted down by the Canadian people, and they're now being instituted all across Canada. This contempt for the Canadian people that our government and courts have is our real issue.
Everything we've worked hard for. This is one of the greatest nations ever in the history of mankind, and the Aboriginals treat us as though there's just absolutely nothing redeeming that they would even want to support, and they don't care if they hurt people with all of this. Lawyers don't care who they're hurting with all of this.
Well, no, but it should be pointed out that our political leaders were aware that this stuff wouldn't pass in 1982, which is why they didn't give us the vote.
So they're making decisions for us behind our backs, decisions that affect everyone.
They did it behind our backs because they knew we'd object.
And we're paying for all of this. We're paying for all of it.
And we proved it in 1992 when the people finally got to vote on it. It showed what would have happened had they put the 1982 Constitution before the Canadian people. It would have been voted down.
Well, when Aboriginals come to our page and do the whole I pay taxes, it's, they think that it's just about, and then they do the whole trust fund. It's not your money. It's all our money, by the way. It's all the people, the government gets the money, their money from us, from taxpayers. That's where it all comes from. And then it goes into trust funds from there. But it's all our money. But, the basic point is that there are court cases that go on. These lawyers and all these court cases are paid for by the taxpayers. That's the multi-billion-dollar industry. That is the multi-billion-dollar industry. That's why we call ourselves end race-based law. Not stop Aboriginals from succeeding. We're looking forward to them rising up and succeeding. What we want to do
the fundamental fact of it is most Canadians believe they have a country based on equality.
Yeah, we thought we did.
And that's a lie at this point.
It's a lie. And the Aboriginals hold us back.
If we want a country based on equality, we're going
They're literally holding us back. They're so racist themselves. They have so many racism issues, and that is their responsibility, Gerry. That's not lawyers. They've always had racism issues, and they're never even expected to deal with their own racism issues. Aside from just race laws, aside from this entire industry, they are extremely racist people, and so the whole thing is corrupt.
That's a separate discussion for another podcast.
But it also adds to, it fuels the fire of this perpetuating problem of race blame, race agendas, race laws. It's all married together. The blame, the, attacking people who are not their race. The justification is they don't have to care because they have to go to school. And so it's okay to do this to everybody else. And we hear that all the time, and we do. And I know you're more mad at the lawyers. Gerry's not a fan of the law profession taking.
Well, because today's discussion is about the Constitution.
Well, it is, and judges are making decisions all alone, and we don't vote those judges in. We don't know who they are even, and they're literally making decisions for the rest of Canada. We don't vote these people in. And so I know it's a law thing too, Gerry. I get that. It's just the whole thing has gone sour on both sides. And no one seems happy about anything that happens. And so we've clearly gone down the wrong road. And so that's our video about the petition. Is there more you'd like to say about the petition, Gerry?
Well, yes, Michele, I'd just like to add the connection that exists here between the mechanism of the petition and reopening the Constitution. The reason we have this petition to Parliament, to the Government of Canada, is a formal petition that is signed on hard copy with verified addresses and signatures. When presented to Parliament, becomes something that has to be acknowledged then by the government. And when it is read in Parliament as a petition to the House, the government has 30 days then to respond in writing to the request of the petitioners. And so our hope with this petition is that it will force the government to recognize the issue, acknowledge the issue and the crux of the matter here, and generate a national discussion on this. The government will be in an awkward position when the time comes to present this petition. That the clauses in the petition are the ones we consider necessary for the removal of the discriminatory divide between Aboriginal peoples and the rest of Canadians. Mm-hmm. We don't need a clause that says all people are equal. We simply need to remove the clauses that say that we're not. And so the requests that we have relevant to the Constitution in the petition are the clauses that would then remove the discriminatory framework, would remove the legal justification for segregated reserves, etc., and discriminatory educational health treatment, etc. And so we hope Canadians will take a look at the petition. It's online, it's downloadable, and if you agree with what we're trying to accomplish here, please sign and mail in the petition. Talk to your friends, relatives. This is a national issue of great importance. It's only going to get worse if we try and ignore it and look away. And so we ask for your help in this very important endeavor. And Michele, I'd like to thank you for the chance today to talk about the petition. And I'll hand it back to you to say goodbye to the listeners for it.
Gerry is the person who put the petition together. He worked on it for months and months and months, and then we sent it to Ottawa, and they had to approve it. It is a legal petition, as he said. And I just want to end this particular podcast, video cast, speaking to all of you, that we want the Aboriginals to come with us. That really is our agenda. It really isn't. We don't want people to come to our page and create more of a division and separation and opposition and enemy with the Aboriginals. We want to explain how corrosive these race laws are in our relations, and we want to literally come together in unity. The Aboriginals can carry on with their culture. They can be as determined as everyone else in Canada. We wish that for them, but they can't be breaking up Canada. That's them oppressing us. And so that's where we're at. We don't want these divisions. We really do think that we're all equal, and we really truly believe in that with all our hearts. I am so anti-racist. I'm willing to stand up and take all of the abuse for doing this, which I do. We both do. Everyone does. But it's our hearts are in it, and we don't hate anybody, and we don't want to encourage hate. We don't want to incite it. We just literally want to end race-based law. We want the Aboriginals to come with us. We are all in this together. No one is going anywhere, and that's our mission, truthfully. And Gerry, thank you so much for all your efforts. Your research is superb. You should come to our Facebook page. And Gerry works at this nonstop, and so do I. And we encourage everyone in Canada to get involved and to sign the petition. And in particular, I'm going to be heading up asking the Aboriginals to sign our petition. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks, Gerry.
Thank you, Michele.
Okay.